Hello, everybody. I'm Claus Hessler from Germany, and I'm sorry I love the drums. Thank you so much.
This is huge, musicians. On the record, bring it on.
Hi, welcome to Musicians on the Record. I'm David Ward. You've heard the music, now hear their story. And how cool is this? We are in the Wisdom Drum Shed today from Long Island, New York on the show. Mr. Dom Famularo and Mr. Claus Hessler. Welcome, guys.
David, this is great to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Dom, let's start out with, what do you love about this guy and his drumming? Please tell us about that, and then we'll talk with Claus.
Well, we always say about the kind when you love someone's drumming, you have to understand someone's personality. And I love Claus and his wonderful family. I met Claus many, many years ago, and his deep heart and his passion comes out in his playing all the time, and his absolute desire as a constant learner to continue learning the art form and pushing himself to new levels. Every few months, something new comes out of Claus Hessler. So because of that, that inspires me. So I'm going to let you guys do your thing. I'm going to hit it because we've got a full day of teaching with Claus, master classes today here on Long Island. This is exciting. You guys go hit it, do your thing. I'm getting the hell out of here. Nice talking to you.
Thanks, Dom. Welcome to the show, Claus. Thank you for being on the show. Can you say a little bit about your schedule? Obviously, you're from Germany. You've been doing some clinics in Boston, and now you're in Long Island, New York with Dom for the day. What's that been like, those clinics so far?
Well, with Dom's woodshed here, it's mostly throughout the day. It's one-on-one lessons with that were sold out like ridiculously fast, as I heard.
Amazing.
So there will still be a masterclass in the evening for about 15 people, which is also sold out here at the Wisdom Drum Shed. And it's always special for me to go back to Dom's place to teach and be doing that, because it also says something about the way how I developed and how I evolved as a player, because I still see myself here having been a student of Dom's back in the early 90s, which is like so long ago that back in the day when I had still hair on my head.
Right. So how did you guys connect? How did you and Dom connect?
That was, again, goes back to the early 90s. That our very first meeting had to take place at a competition where I was taking part, and Dom was a part of the jury. So besides Dom, there was there was Gary Chafee, and Larry London, still back by then, and Jim Chapin, who I already know back in the day. And that was our first encounter. And then a year later, Dom would be like on the road with his little clinic workshop act, pretty much around the world. So at one of the schools where I was teaching at that time, he asked for a local drum teacher to open up for him. And I said, yeah, I'm gonna do it. And right at the next second, I thought, oh baby, wish I wouldn't said that.
Right. But that's bold.
But obviously Dom kind of liked it, and he invited me to Long Island, and from there we continue. So I started with him and came to the US a couple of times, and and it finally ended up like writing books together and being connected and being like on the same bill, performing together, which is like still to the very day, it sounds a little bit like a miracle, because
right.
it was that dream I always had, and now we're here right in the middle of it, and every now and then I got to pinch myself and say, okay, is that true?
Right, it's amazing. What an incredible story. You mentioned your books, Claus. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I'm not sure, there's been a lot of books around the open-handed technique. You've got Open-Handed Technique Volume 1 and 2. What inspired you to write a book and teaching about that?
when I started playing the drums somewhere around age of 4, I started playing open-handed because I did not have a teacher who would show me what to do on the drums.
Okay.
And I would say that any kid that goes to the drums for the first time would pretty much do exactly that, unless he or she has a teacher, father, brother, whatever, who already plays the drums and crosses the hands. So if you pick a kid from the street who doesn't know anything, she or he will most likely play open-handed.
Yes, interesting.
I would say so. So there's some sort of kid logic to that. And now I'm skipping a lot of stuff, but so I was playing open-handed for quite some time as a kid. Then, of course, did some cross-handed playing because your teacher would tell you, that's the way you're supposed to play and all of that. And I switched back in the early 90s to open-handed playing, mostly because Dom was the person who pushed me to do that. And let's put it this way: the exercises I wrote for myself, like on the way back from cross-handed to open-handed, also having in mind, boy, what would it be that I would teach somebody who would set out for that same journey? What sort of exercises would I possibly come up with? And so it was stuff I wrote for myself, and that was later published pretty much in book format and came out as volume 1 and volume 2. So mostly the reason why these two books were pretty good, I should say, is that they are beta tested. It's not like somebody sat down on a desk and I have this cool idea, I write this down. So I tried all of that with myself, and this is, I guess, why they work.
For someone who doesn't know about open-handed, hasn't really played that too much, what would be the benefits of learning that style?
Well, first of all, I think playing open-handed, I'm not religious about that. I'm not saying this is right and this is wrong. So that, I think, is an important mindset for that complete discussion we are having right now.
Sure.
I think not crossing your hands, but opening your hands when you play an instrument that calls for action or independent action of 4 different limbs just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Why would you do that if
right.
you would reach out for this battleship in front of you?
Yeah.
That's just one thing.
And are you talking about, for example, playing the hi-hat with your left hand and then the snare with your right, or maybe even a hi-hat in the middle or on the right-hand side of your kit if you're right-handed, and then playing the snare on the 2 and 4 with your left?
It's a mixture of all kinds of things. So if you look at my drum set, it's pretty much I'm having, and that was not the starting idea to go with a symmetrical setup, but I have like snares on both sides of my kit, like 1 in the center, 2 on the side. I have 2 ride cymbals, I have 2 hi-hats, I have a floor tom left, a floor tom right, a crash cymbal left, crash cymbal right, cowbell left, cowbell right. So it's pretty much the important stuff happening on both sides of my kit, which gives me much more freedom to express what I think I want to play.
Yeah. I love that concept too, and I think it's certainly true from my own experience because I'm a drummer as well. And when I'm crossing hands, there's something happens in the brain because I didn't start till later. But when I am open-handed with the hi-hat, either in the middle or the left, even on the ride, opening up, I just feel way more independent.
Absolutely, and there's also some sort of interesting parallel if you. For instance, if you look at people how they play brushes, now you might find that distracting. How about brushes? But if you look at playing brushes, no matter if people do that matched or traditional grip, they usually make their swishing or circular motions with the left hand, which is interesting because playing the brushes is a very personal thing. Put 10 drummers in a line, and 10 of them have a different, or maybe a completely different take to it. Right. But still, a right-handed brush player would choose to make circular or swishing motions with the left hand and then interacting with the right hand. And same goes for a lot of percussion stuff. Like if you study congas and you have your floating hand, that could also serve as some ostinato function with your left hand again, whereas your right hand is doing the fancy stuff. So that says a lot about how you possibly could also organize open-handed playing on the drum set.
Sure. And I love the concept of that's kind of how a kid starts without knowing or without any kind of teacher or lessons. That's a natural kind of position. Now you speaking of teachers, though, in addition to Dom, you also had another amazing one, Jim Chapin. Can you tell us about how you met him and how that came to be with the lessons with Jim?
Well, one of the first times I met Jim was in a music store back in Germany. So I would go into the store and somebody would say, "Oh, here's Jim Chapin in the corner with his pad." And I say, and of course I had heard of Jim before. And I go, "What? That's Jim Chapin." Okay, so I would go there, and of course he would have the usual bunch of people around him, and he would show his little Moeller thing and his independent stuff, and talk to people, drums, wherever and as much as he could, because that was his true passion. That was number one priority in his life. And then later on, he happened to be working at another school where I was teaching around that time, and I was the person to take care of him. So I was pretty much responsible for the drum department back there. And
where was that, Claus?
Oh, that was back in Germany back in these days. I mean, we're talking like early 90s, 91, 92.
Okay.
Somewhere there. And pretty soon after that, Jim kept calling me saying, "You remember me? I spent a week at your school, and I'd like to come back, and so maybe you can organize some work for me." So I said, "Jim, it's beautiful. Of course I'll do that. So when are you planning to come back? Like in 6 months or so?" And he would say, "Next week." I said, "Oh, what?"
Right. No pressure.
But that was usually the way how, say, administrative stuff was happening. Like with Jim, it was a little bit sort of an organized chaos. Everything in free fall.
Sure.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So obviously, one of the things that you are most well known for, and I saw you on a Drumeo lesson about a year maybe ago, is obviously the Moeller method, where you learned that from Jim. Can you tell us about what you learned from him and how you teach others the Moeller method?
Well, how I learned from Jim was actually a twofold experience. It was of course taking like formal lessons with him. So you would assign a time, and we're both in the same room, and Jim is showing you something, and you try to follow. That's setting number one. Setting number two was when I was organizing work for him, which sometimes included several days or like 10 days or 2 weeks of work for him throughout Europe sometimes. Many times the people would request I stay in the room and help translating, because most of the time their English was not too good.
Sure.
So I learned such a lot of stuff by watching Jim teaching, and not being like in that crossfire of you being the victim and the teacher, but you would watch how Jim would sort of take care of the challenges that the student had.
Yeah.
So after a couple of weeks and after a couple of years, then later I should say, of that procedure, you would find out, okay, here's this guy, he's obviously doing something strange, so how is Jim reacting? And you would take a guess, what exercise is he coming up with, or what is he giving this guy? And that was even more incredible in learning the system and the method as he fine-tuned it from Moeller, as having lessons from the master himself.
What an incredible way to learn the Moeller method, by seeing Jim teaching others, and that you could adjust and adapt your own playing with that. That's pretty incredible. I don't know if you're able to, Claus, and I don't know if Dom is still there with you, but are you able to possibly give us a demonstration, an example of the Moeller method as Jim taught you?
One of the important things that get lost at times was that that Moeller's and Chapin's take on the subject of up and down strokes was different, as opposed to how people in the tradition of say George Lawrence Stone or Joe Morello would understand that.
Yes.
Because in that in that perception of full stroke and half stroke and low stroke, it's pretty much the stick that dictates what kind of stroke it is. Like the full stroke position, the tip of the stick is here, and that makes it a full stroke, or this makes a half stroke, or this makes a low stroke. Now, what is jumping forward, if Jim would show you something like that at a moderate tempo, he would say down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. But if I stop after the down, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, you would wonder, boy, could that be a downstroke really in terms of watching the stick height? So there's something strange going on. But the important lesson for Jim was, and he also made notes with that, and I still have some of them, saying the ups and downs indicate the direction the hand is traveling at the time of the hit, and not the stick.
Not the stick.
So if I do that for you, and I say down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and you watch my hand, that perfectly fits.
Yes.
But still, there's reaction to the stick, and they had another word for that. Today we would say, well, it's the power of rebound, or the force of rebound.
Yeah.
But Moeller and Chapin would call it the flybacks.
The flybacks.
Flybacks, and I mean, some people who also happen to receive some of the copies that Jim was always traveling with, they might have read this expression, but the flybacks really refer to the tips of the stick, and that's how your stick flies back. So saying that, a big misconception, I should say, is when people try to play and to practice Moeller like this.
Yeah.
Holding the stick down, not allowing for the flyback, because as an effect, or they think the tip of the stick is still dictating if it's up or down, but they don't think about these different perceptions. In that one case, the stick is like dictating.
Yes.
In the other case, with Moeller, it's the hand
Yes.
that dictates the up and down. So that's just in a nutshell a very important thing that I guess is vital about Moeller technique.
So you also teach in Germany as well as in Boston and New York. Tell us about your teaching at the conservatory in Germany, please.
Well, it's I'm working in different places there. So like in Frankfurt with the University of Music and Performing Arts, it's mostly drum set people that I have there, but it's also a bunch of students that actually study classical drums. Okay. So they have set as like on the side. It's not their major, but they still learn drum set, and many of them also do approach me for a better understanding of traditional rudiments in terms of Moeller technique, but even going back further to the European roots of rudiments, like what happened in Switzerland and in France in the 1400s. And I also wrote a book about that, which should be out with Alfred, I think soon, which is called Camp Duty Update, which covers a lot of that historic background and a lot of things, of which I guess many of that, or a lot of that, has been lost throughout the years in the understanding of rudiments in a better way. So that's another thing I do there. Whereas on other academies and universities, like in Mannheim, for instance, I teach mostly drum set, and there's no classical department whatsoever. There I'm taking care of the master students, and of course I still do have a quite active schedule with private students that come and look me up. So there's all kinds of professional players that come around. So for instance, one of my students that is currently making some kind of a wave is Annika, for instance.
Sure. Yes. Annika Nilis, right?
Annika Nilis, yeah,
Nilis,
right.
Yes. Yeah.
And,
she's great.
yeah. So she used to live just a few kilometers away, like in the next village from my town. So I've known her like not forever, but for a long time. So.
Yeah, and she's an amazing player as well, and she took lessons from you, Claus.
She took a lot of lessons from me, yeah. So we had some sort of rather, say, intense educational relationships, to say, and but still, one of the important things for me is that I'm not shaping my students to sound like myself. I just give to them what I think they need,
yeah,
in order to be themselves, right. Which I guess is very important, because ultimately you don't want to be the copy of somebody else, but you want to find your voice. And this is where I'm just assisting as a teacher.
You bet. And I love the lineage and the history. I mean, it sounds like you've written a book about the history of the drumming and rudiments. But, you know, from Jim Chapin and Dom to you and to Annika, I love the lineage from the classic drumming to the modern drummers. That's really wonderful that you're continuing that legacy. So you're also, Dom tells me, in a band yourself called Flux. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Please tell us about Flux, and when's your next gig coming so that people can catch you guys?
Well, first of all, I mean, Flux is sort of a special lineup, because it's a Hammond organ trio.
Oh, great.
So it's a Hammond organ, guitar, drums.
Beautiful.
There's no bass player to fool around with.
Okay.
And it's also, say, a bit special because Paul, the organ player, used to be another student of mine.
Oh, wow.
So at age of, I don't know, 5 or something, he started taking lessons with me.
Amazing.
So that also says something about the gap in age. But anyhow, with Paul being still to the very day a pretty good drummer, that says a lot about his facility, like on the organ, working with feet and hands and understanding time and pulse and all of that.
Amazing.
So good thing about that band is I can play whatever I want.
Yeah.
Paul always knows where I am.
That's great.
So
Wow.
that's like amazing. And the other guy in the band, who is a really world-class guitar player, I should say, also based out of Germany, Thomas Langer. And I have known Thomas for, I don't know, for sure, at least 25 years, and we just understand each other like blindfold. And we have the same musical heroes, which is like a profound mixture of the Beatles and Pat Metheny and anything in between.
That's great.
So our stuff is, of course, original tunes, all, and but not really heavily focusing on jazz. So it's not ding 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 ding, as you would maybe expect from a Hammond trio, but it's more or less located like more in the R&B, world music, jazz mix. So it's kind of hard to put out a category for that.
Sure.
So let me see. The next gig is only in August, back in Germany. So and in this fall we most likely would produce our or actually prepare at least our 3rd album. So so you might check out our Facebook thing, which is Flux Music Project, or you'll also find a link like on my site, claushessler.com, where you can also get our CDs and all of that.
You mentioned some of your earlier drumming, can we talk about influences? Who are some of the biggest drumming influences and or just music in general for you?
Well, first of all, speaking from today's standpoint, I would say I love influences which are not drum related.
Okay.
So learning how other players of other instruments create musical expression and then translating that to my instrument is something which adds even more personality to certain things, because you're not that much in the danger of being trapped in copying something that was already done. So a big focus for me was always always was to fine tune my own expression on the drums, and finding some sort of your individual style. So I mean, just in general for that. As far as drummers go, I should say I was influenced by, of course, all the heroes which are out there. But I always had a strong admiration for all the guys who had this unique expression in the way they played. So, for instance, at age of say from 14 to 16, I was the biggest Neil Peart fan you could imagine. So Rush was that was my religion. I should say.
Sure.
You would most likely not sense that if you hear me play today, but it did something to my playing.
Sure.
And so I could play all of that stuff upside down.
Wow.
any time of night, like. Of course, all the permanent waves, moving pictures, hemispheres, exit stage left, and all of that stuff. I knew the fills, I knew the whole procedure. I was like super into that.
You dove right in.
That was one phase in my life. Sure. And at another time, you would, of course, my teacher would sometimes give me records like after the lesson. So at a certain point, I got Inner Mounting Flame from Vishnu Orchestra.
Sure.
Which, in the first place, I didn't really know how to take it. I still remember I was like extremely impressed, and it also changed something. And to the very day, I think Billy Cobham is from a conceptual standpoint of how he changed the instrument for himself. One of the most influential players of the 20th and 21st century. I'm not saying that everybody has to like that, but I'm just saying from a conceptual standpoint, I think that's very impressive what Billy did for the drumming community.
Yes.
And he changed the pace of drumming really forever. And another experience was that then I would be exposed to Pat Metheny. So I totally dig Pat Metheny and all the drummers he had.
Sure.
Beginning from Danny Gottlieb to Paul Vertigo to then Antonio Sanchez and all of that. So these were big influences, and we could continue in that style. But let me close this one by saying I always liked the people who really found their very personal voice on the instrument.
Well, and I love also that drummers inspire you and other musicians, because I think that adds to our musicality as musicians, right?
Yeah. So bringing up Pat Metheny again, or Glenn Gould, for instance. Boy, when Glenn Gould plays Bach, that's like a different world, and it could just as well be like an African balafon player, or it could be some gamelan orchestra from the Philippines or from the Far East. It could be all kinds of things, and as long as it moves me to a certain degree, and it touches some inner string, that's what I want to have.
Beautifully said. So, in closing then, Claus, can I ask you for people, musicians who are watching this in the future and they would like to be able to learn their craft as well as you have with the drums, what advice would you give them? How would you, what advice would you give them?
That's a good question, actually. I should maybe come up with two of my favorite things are, number one, don't be afraid to be yourself. That would be one thing. Number two is understanding that creativity is always an act of rebellion.
That's great. I love that.
In order to be creative, you got to do something in a different way. You got to change something. It's like completely insane to think you're creative if you do anything the way it has always been done. So saying that, it means being creative would for sure begin with learning the rules, because only once you learn and know the rules, you can get rid of them.
Right. Yeah.
One thing without the other is, I think, not possible. Because how are you acting against the rules if you don't know the rules? Because chances are you exactly follow the rules, but you just don't know. So chances are exactly that happens. So again, creativity is an act of rebellion. You do something differently as it was done before. And if you allow for that, you will find your own voice.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Excellent stuff. Words of wisdom from the Wisdom Drum Shed, Long Island, New York. Claus Hessler, thank you for being on Musicians on the Record. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for watching.